assuming that we've got a histogram already, and this histogram doesn't match the frequency table. I just drew it up on the spot. We then just take the midpoints of the intervals, and we also have added an extra interval on both sides so that the frequency polygon gets back to 0. And then we use straight lines to connect these midpoints. And so that would be called a frequency polygon. Okay, so that was the last lesson that we did. And for the most part, it's a pretty straightforward graph. Now, in the lesson today, we're going to talk about something called an ogive, or a cumulative frequency table. And so whenever we have to draw a ogive or a cumulative frequency table, there's a couple of differences. The one difference is we need to calculate the cumulative frequency, or the cumulative frequency column, in addition to the frequency column. And sometimes we'll even add another column for the point that we're going to plot on the ogive. Now, we're going to start the lesson today with an example, but I just want to give you a little bit of warm up before that. So if we are calculating the cumulative frequency for a set of data, the first row will always be the same as the frequency column, because you're counting up basically how many data values occurred between 1 and 10. But when we want to get the cumulative frequency for the second row, we have to count not just what we have already, but what's occurred after it. And so we would get 5. And what that says is from 1 to 20, we've had 5 values that have occurred. Then if we go to the next row, the cumulative frequency column would be 9. Now, I want you guys to tell me what are the next 2 values. I'll call this A and this B. What are the next 2 values I'm going to get in my cumulative frequency column? I like what I'm seeing, Quincy. I like Lita. I like what I'm seeing. Keep them coming, guys and girls. So this is going to be 11 because I add 2 plus 9 is 11. And if I add 1 more, I get 12. So think about it. 9 plus 2 is 11. And 11 plus 1 is 12. Okay, so now when we draw the graph, and we're going to do this in a moment, when we plot an ogive, what an ogive has is it has not the frequency on the vertical axis, it has the cumulative frequency. Okay, so that's why we're calculating the cumulative frequency, because the ogive, which we're going to draw, is a graph that has the cumulative frequency on the vertical. Now, when you actually plot the points on an ogive, you don't use the middle anymore. Now, that was a previous graph. Can anybody tell me, of the interval that we deal with, what is the X value that is going to be used for an ogive? So I've got this interval 1 to 10. I'll tell you that it's not the middle that we use. So what point of the interval are we going to use to give us a point to plot on our ogive? Does anybody have an idea of where we would use it? Arriva, I think you're on fire here. Someone's hand is up. Whose hand was up there? Would anybody like to tell us? Kumotsile? Okay, right. So instead of using the middle, we now go to the end of the interval, and we say our X coordinate here would be 10. And then what's my Y coordinate going to be? It's going to be whatever the cumulative frequency was, which would be 2. So my first point on my imaginary ogive that I'm drawing up here, let's say that I'm going up in tens here. And I'll go up in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. can I ask what TA stands for? Okay, we'll get back to that in a moment. So my very first point on the ogive would be the point 10, 2. So I go to 10 on my thing and here, and I'd put that point over here. I want to know, ladies and gentlemen, what is going to be the second point on my ogive? What is going to be the second point on my ogive? Who has an answer? If you put your hand up or put it in the chat. So I see a couple of students have said the x coordinate is going to be 20. And what's the y coordinate going to be? It's going to be 5 because it comes from here. So it's the end of the interval. So you get the 20 and then the cumulative frequency total, which is 5. So what would that point look like? Now, if I'm using this scale, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it would be just about over here. Now, so how did you get the 1 to 10 frequency and, okay, cumulative frequency? Karabo, we're going to do an example soon. This is just the warm-up. So all I'm showing you guys is this is what I want you to know today. When you're going to draw an ogive, you're going to start by getting the cumulative frequency column, and then you're also going to get your points. And what's going to happen then after that is you're going to get a series of points. Let's just say it looks something, again, I'm summarizing for the moment. Let's say you get a series of points. Now, what you need to do is, even though these are all your points, an ogive is going to be a smooth curve. And also remember, because your very first point was at the end of the interval, you're still going to have a point that gets you all the way down to the ground. And so you'll add basically at the beginning of the first interval, you add an extra point here, and then you're going to join these points together using a curved line. And that's the basic idea for an ogive or a cumulative frequency table. Now, there's a lot of other things I can tell you, but just for the first half of today, all I want to practice is, how do I go through the table that I need to create to draw an ogive? And it'll be a grouped data table. And then how do I plot this on a basically a graphing plane? So I just want to have a quick sense of how the class is doing before we do the first example. Thumbs up if most of the stuff I've put out there has made sense to you. Thumbs down if it looks very unfamiliar to you. Just want to do a quick little feedback, because obviously I don't have your lovely faces to look at or your lovely voices to hear. And so it gives me some sense of how to, okay. So it's a bit of a mixture, but I think we're ready for example 1. Okay, so just some basics. What is an ogive or cumulative frequency curve? It basically shows the information in a cumulative frequency table. And we often use it for estimating the median or interquartile range of grouped data. Now that will come later once we've learned how to draw it. The important bit that I showed you earlier on is when you draw a cumulative frequency curve from a table, the cumulative frequencies are plotted at the upper limit of the interval, or basically at the end of the interval. Okay, so that's an important difference from the frequency polygon. So what I want to do now is I want you guys to complete this table for me. So this is a typical question from like an exam where they'll say to you, here is a data set, and it shows the time in minutes taken by learners to travel to school. So there are 4 students that take less than or equal to 10 minutes to get to school. I want you to calculate the cumulative frequency column and then the ordered pairs. And once you've done that, you can just say done in the chat. But I want everybody to take the time now and make sure you know how to fill out a table that allows you to then draw a ogive. Over to you guys. I should have some cool theme music now that goes do, 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 do. Just to set the mood.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
You know, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire music, you know. Do, do,
Oh,
do.
yes.
Maybe that's too stressful.
Yeah.
Something just... Okay. And then if there are questions, so there was one student who was asking about how is the graph going up the whole time when we have y coordinates that go down? Okay, Komotsile, we'll have a look at this now. The cumulative frequency will always be going up as we add to it. It will still be going up. It'll be going up less quickly though, depending on, well, it can go up less quickly. But let's just see how it goes on this example. And we'll go from there. So remember, you're filling out this table for me. And then once you finish this table, I want you to draw up a Cartesian plane. Well, not Cartesian plane, basically one quadrant of a Cartesian plane, so that we're ready to draw this ogive. And are there any questions? Because now, so for those of you who feel comfortable, so Prince, is there ever a time the graph can decrease? It can't, because you on the y-axis is cumulative frequency. And so it can look like it's bending a little bit, like it's not going up as quickly as before, but it'll never come down because you're adding people to a list. So you can't lose people from the list, essentially. Okay, so as an example of what you should have, you would definitely have 4 and 16 for the first row. And then if I add 28, I should get 36 plus 4, so you should get 44. And then once you've completed that row, then your ordered pair would be, you'd start with a 10, 4, and the second row would be a 20, 16. Now, I'll give you the complete answer in a moment, but I just want to check, are there any questions about filling out that table there? Are there any questions? So your table should look something like that. So let me actually, a lot of writing, so maybe I can just take some of that writing out of the focus for a second. Then we can look at the table. So those are the points that you should have. Now, they've added an extra column for this bit, and that's not wrong to do that, but essentially we need to get back to 0. What I do is I just join them up. Okay.
Mr. S.
So Emikle has asked, how do we get the ordered pairs? So we go to the end of the interval. The end of this interval is 10. And then we go to the cumulative frequency column and we get, what's that? So that's 10, 4. For the second row, what's the end of that interval? It's 20. What's the total for cumulative frequency? It's going to be 16. So what we should be doing then to draw this graph, if you look at how it's going up, I'm going to start with a 0, 10, 20, 30, make sure it's 10, 20, 30, 40, say 50, 60. How high does it get? That's about as high as it gets. Okay. So what I want you to do now, guys and girls, is I want you to plot your ogive using the points we've got here. So as an example, my very first point would be 10, 4. So 10, now 10, 4 is going to be about here. And then my second point is going to be 20, 16, which is probably going to be about there. And I want to see if you can draw a curve that resembles this ogive for me. Okay, so over to you guys. I want you to draw an ogive using this, using these points that I've shown you here. And remember, this is showing you time taken to travel to school. Oh, Emichle's got some interesting observations here. So 30, 44. It jumped up a lot all of a sudden there. 40. So again, once you've had a chance to draw your ogive, won't you say done in the chat? Just so I know kind of how things are going. And if you, okay. So all I did was step one is making sure I add a column for cumulative frequency and I have my ordered pairs. Now, once I've plotted my points to draw my ogive, what I'm going to do is I actually make an extra point at the beginning of my first interval. And this is so that I get back to 0. Okay. Now, in this particular data set, I know that there are only 120 children involved, right? Because the highest total I can get to is 120. It would also be the same. If I added up the frequency column, I would get to 120. So in this story, the first thing to recognize is there are 120 children who've been surveyed. That's why I can never get above the line 120. Now, once I've plotted my points, I need to start from the basically 0 on the cumulative frequency. So I go to the beginning of the interval, and then I'm going to join these using a curved line. It looks something like that. And so this is what we would call an ogive. And I just put in, was it 50, 105, and then 60 is 120. And so this is what we call an ogive. I want to stop now and ask, are there any questions or comments about the process? Because some of you, this might be the first time you're seeing it. I've left out one little thing. There should be 16 over here. 1, 2, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6. Yes. Are there any questions or comments? Don't be afraid to put it in the chat or raise your hand. I want to check that you know how to draw an ogive. Okay, well then I'm going to move on a little bit and I'm going to ask you about, well, let's have a look at the perfect, and we've got that already. Okay, well, let's do another one. Let's start another one then. So if there are no questions, I'm going to practice another ogive with you. I'm going to go through this process again. Give me a thumbs up if you like that. Give me a thumbs down if you want to do something else. Okay. So I think we need one more of these to practice. So let's do that. So this is what the perfect answer would look like, but you can see exactly how we plotted that. Now, normally what happens is we would also ask a question about estimating the median, the lower quartile, and the upper quartile, but we'll do that. We'll come back to that at a later stage. For now, I want to practice another one of exactly the same thing. So this is a old exam question from that I had lying around. And step one was to complete the cumulative frequency table. And then what I want you to do is I want you to add another column for the point. And then I want you to draw me. Well, let's do that first. Once you've done that, click, say done in the chat. And then after that, we will go on to seeing how to draw an ogive from this data set. So over to you guys. So Lusanda, I absolutely will come back to estimating the mode and stuff like that, and the modal interval, but we're just going to make sure we've absolutely got this ogive drawing process down. And then the second half of this lesson and the next lesson will be all about interpreting the ogive. Okay. So once you've completed the table, just say in the chat, table done. And then I know that you've done the table. And you can then move on to actually drawing the ogive of this particular group data set. This story is about people's height in a particular class. So the intervals are intervals of height.
They're very quick, hey?
Yeah, we just watch that because I think some of the students are very quick, but we just want to make sure that we. So yeah, do let us know, or even message Label privately if you feel like we're going a bit quickly. We do want to know. Okay, so your table should look a bit like this. However, in order to get the point is going to be 95.5, because remember, you're going to the end of the interval and then you take the cumulative frequency, and then you would also get, just make sure I've got the right size pen. So then I'd get 100, and then I would get 14. I'd get 105 and 31, 110, 59, 115, 80, then 120, 90. Okay, so what we now know is that in this particular data set, the cumulative frequency at the end of the last row tells me there are 90 students involved in this cumulative frequency curve. And these are the points that are going to help me draw this curve. Now, it's now pretty much midway through the lesson. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to take a quick break. And then on the flip side of this, we're going to draw the curve. And we're also going to start to talk about estimating the median and things like that after our break. But I know that we need to just take a break now to stand up and stretch so that we can give our brains a break. So won't you please label, in fact, let me ask the students, please turn your cameras on so we can see your lovely faces, and then stand up for a moment and stretch with us, because we know our brains need a bit of a break. So, and I'm just going to do a quick roll of my shoulders. Oh, Lusanda, there we go.
Shout out to Lusanda and Lee. Come on, guys, join in on the stretch. Give your mind a break, give your body a break. Shout out to William.
There we go.
Yes. You will thank yourself for doing this.
Yeah.
Shout out to Lilita.
It's so nice to see everyone's faces.
Yes, loving this energy, guys.
It feels like a real family then.
Yeah. Our online math family.
It is. It's a different kind of family. But it does feel like there's a group bond, for lack of a better word. Cool. Fantastic, guys. Okay, so before we get back to the cumulative frequency drawing, I have a short little brain break I want you to try. So just for fun, what do you think? How many squares do you see in that picture? How many squares do you think you have? Aha. So those who are saying 10, you've got a lot of them, but I'll give you one hint that you haven't got all of them. I see a square over here as well. But I also see a square over here. So I think most of you know 9 plus 1 is the initial starting point, because there's clearly 1 in each of these. And then the whole one is 10. But there's a few more that are hiding. Hey. Let's get those answers coming in.
This one really catches you out.
It does, yeah. So you're not wrong to count to 10, but okay, so I see a lot of students are going with 14, and that is the correct answer. So the 10 is fairly straightforward, but then you get this one, you get this one, so that's up to 12. Then you get 13, which is that one, and then the last one, and it's going to be that one. And so it's going to be 10 plus 4, which is 14. Okay. So I think that was something a little bit different. I try to get away from the number puzzles for today. And I hope that you enjoyed that one. Something a bit different, geometric brain break. So let's get back to the main focus for today. What I wanted to do is I want to now draw a ogive using the information about points that you just figured out. And so I want you to draw me a ogive using that information. And when it is done, will you just say ogive done in the chat? But I want to give everyone enough time to do this. So think about what are the steps you need to go through. And clearly you are going to need a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. Your vertical axis is going to be a cumulative frequency column, and the horizontal is going to be height in centimeters. And so what do you need? What is your ogive going to look like? So if I was plotting it, so there would be 95, and this would be 5. So we would get that. And then we get 104 and 14. So it should be about there. 105.31. So that would be about here. 110.59. You really have to watch your up there. 115.80 should be up there. And 120.90 should be up there. Yeah. Now the problem is if I just start from here, the problem is I'm not getting back to 0 for my cumulative frequency. And so I have to make another dot, which is at the beginning of my interval, or basically down here. And so my ogive should look, you're quite right, it really is starting to look like an S shape here. So that would be my ogive, my cumulative. 1, 2. Okay. Are there any questions about how I drew that ogive? Because if there aren't, I want to move on to the second part of this question, which is how would I estimate the median of this grouped data table using the ogive? How would I estimate the median? Because that's what the exam question actually says. It says use the ogive to estimate the median height. Indicate on the graph where you would read this off and provide the value in the space below. So are there any questions or comments about that? Okay, so I just see, so done. Okay, so in this data set, how many, this is my question to you, how many students are involved in this data set? So tell me in the chat how many students are involved, what I would call the N number. What is the N number for this data set? It's 90. Awesome. Okay, fantastic. It's 90 because the last row in the cumulative frequency column is 90. Awesome. Now, when we want to calculate the median with lists of data, we always find the median by using a position calculation. And the way the position calculation goes is a half times n plus 1. Now, since we know what n is in this particular data set, what is the position of Q2 going to be? What is the position of Q2 going to be? And you put that in the chat. So yeah, half times 90 plus 1, which is going to be 45.5. So because this is an approximation, ladies and gentlemen, we don't need to be quite as accurate as when we deal with lists of data. But basically, the position of the median is 45.5. Now, normally, if we had a list of data, we would go to position 45, and we'd average it out between the 45th and 46th position. But in this case, because it's grouped data, we don't have that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the ogive's cumulative frequency column or cumulative frequency plot, and then estimate where the median is from that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my vertical column for cumulative frequency, and I'm going to find 45.5. So let me see if I can do that. Where is 45.5 on my vertical column? 40, 45, it's going to be about here. So that would be the position of the median. But what it wants is what the question wants is it wants the estimated median height. It doesn't want the position of the median. So can anybody tell me, maybe in the chat or raising your hand, how am I going to take this position on the vertical axis and connect it to the actual median height? Let's go to Kwezi. Kwezi, what do you think we need to do?
So what we're gonna do is draw a line to the ogive, and then
what type of line?
A straight line.
Okay, so like I'm doing now, and what then?
And as soon as you touch the ogive, you're going to draw the line straight down to the.
Yes, that's fine. Keep going.
Yeah, you're going to draw the line straight down to the scale on the bottom.
Yeah, exactly that. So if you think about, thank you, Quentin, that's exactly what I wanted to show there. The process here is you find the cumulative frequency position on the vertical axis, you come across to your ogive, and then you go straight down. And if I look at this value over here, if it's going up in 2s, it looks to me to be around about 108. And now there is some leeway, but basically we would say that the median, the estimated median would be about 108 if we look at the scale on our ogive. So give me a thumbs up if you understand that basic idea. We're going to practice this again in a moment, but I just want to see if you can see the connection between the position, and then we're going to the cumulative frequency column, and then we're going to the height, basically, which is the other axes. Now, this method can actually be used to find the upper quartile as well, or Q3. So we can get an estimate for Q3 using exactly the same method that I just used now. And so I want you guys to do that for me. Can you calculate the estimated, so I want you to use the ogive to find the estimated upper quartile of the data. You've just found the median, which means that there's 50% of students are below 108, and 50% of the students are between 108 and 120. I want you to use the same idea that I just showed you, where you find the position and then you find the value, except now you're going to try and find the upper quartile.
Mr. East?
Yeah.
There's a question from Onele that can you say that it is between 100 or 110, or should you give the exact value?
So Onele, you would normally, obviously because I'm using a digital canvas, my accuracy is not as accurate as it would be if you were using a ruler and a scale on paper. Generally, you would have a little bit of leeway around 108. You wouldn't be able to put 102. So you would have to be more accurate. But obviously, what tends to happen in exams is we give you a pre-made scale. And so it tends to make that a lot easier than this example is.
Thanks, Mr. East.
Pleasure. So Prince is asking, what is the formula to find the position of the upper quartile? And to find the position of the upper quartile, it's just going to be 3/4 times n plus 1. So who can tell me in the chat, what is the position of Q3 going to be? What's the position? And then we still have to calculate what Q3 is in this group data set. So 3/4 times n plus 1. It was, what was my data set? It was 91 or 90. So I get 68.25. So the position is 68.25. However, this is not the value, this is the position. And so I still need to use my ogive to work out what the estimated upper quartile is, or Q3. So I go to 68.25 and I try and find it approximately on my drawing. And I see it as just below 70. And I draw a straight line across and I get there. I want to know from you guys, what is the value for Q3 that you guys are getting, the upper quartile? Pop your answer in the chat. I'd love to see what you guys are getting for that. So it feels to me like I should go straight down. And so it's going to be somewhere approximately around there. So it's going to be about 112, 113, somewhere around that point. If I look at my, and this is an estimate, right? So now I want to challenge you to think about, what does this actually mean? So this means that there are 75% of students are 112 centimeters, are basically between 90 and 112 centimeters in height. The remaining 25% of students are between 112 centimeters and 120 centimeters in height. So the upper quartile divides the lower 3/4 from the upper quarter of the data. Leakley said, so is it always going to be 3/4 for upper quartile? Yes. And it'll always be 1/4 times n plus 1 for the lower quartile. So let me just show you one last question that's very common. Sometimes they say to you, use the ogive to find the 80th percentile. So instead of finding Q3, you have to find P80, or let's make it P90. So today what we've done is we learned how to draw an ogive. We then learned how to do these interpretation questions. And in fact, you know what, guys, we're actually running out of time. Let me say that as a beginning of the next lesson. So we could also say, give me an estimated value for P90. And all I'm going to ask you is, what formula are we going to use to calculate the position of P90? What formula do you think we're going to use to calculate the position of P90? Let's go to the chat here. William, what do you think we're going to use to find the position of P90? Hey, William.
Hi. To find the position of P90, we'd have to put 90 over 100 and then times it by 90 plus 1 or n plus 1.
Perfect. So we are going to get basically that. And I'm going to do this with you guys now. Thank you, William. That was fantastic. 91. The position I get is 81.9. Now, 81.9, or the 90th percentile's position, what would an estimated value for P90 be equal to? Well, I do the same approach that I've been using today. I find the position 81.9, which is about there. And I'm just going to draw a horizontal thing across there, and then go down to there. And what it looks like to me is that P90 is, so there was 110, 112, 114, 115. Yeah. So it looks to me like the 90th percentile is about 115. And what that means is that 90% of the students will either be 115 centimeters in height or less, and only 10% of the students in this group will be greater than 115 centimeters in height. Okay. Guys, I think that I want to pause now for the day and bring it to a close. This is what we've learned today. We've learned about how to extend a table to include the cumulative frequency column and a plotting column. We've learned how to plot the points to draw a curve called an ogive, and it looks a bit like an S shape. And then now at the very end, we've learned how to estimate the median, how to estimate the upper quartile, and even estimate P90. And in the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to continue practicing this idea and look at all exam questions around the ogive. Okay, but that's all we're going to cover for today. Lebo, could I ask you to please share the polls with students? We have 2 polls today. I'm not sure if they can be done at the same time or done one after the other. But if you could help us, guys, by just helping us with the poll right now.
It would. Sorry, Mr. Ace. I think we have to do one after the other. I can't launch them at the same time.
No problem. So let's just do the pacing poll first, and then we will do a second one. If you could just stay on the line for that second one.
Please, guys, we really appreciate your feedback.
Yes. So Karabo has said, wait, sir, how do we find the frequency if you are only given the interval? So Karabo, we will deal with different types of questions. It depends on the question you're talking about. It's hard for me to answer that without having a physical example in front of me. But I would say that we'll try and look at all exam papers questions at the end of this unit, and then hopefully we should see every variation.